Today is August 22nd, 2024, and it is the 248th anniversary of the start of the Battle for New York. The Battle of New York in 1776 was the largest battle of the American Revolution up until that point. It was also one of the largest throughout the war, both in amount of space and number of men who participated. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the beginning of that battle. A few years ago, while I was still doing my walking tours, I went out to the spot where the British landed and shot some video about it. So let's take a look at that now.
August 22nd, 1776, Brooklyn. This is an area called Gravesend, and this is where the English landed that morning to begin the battle for New York. If you were over here in Brooklyn and you looked out across the Narrows over to Staten Island, you would see about 400 British ships and transports headed this way. When they get close to the shore, they stop. 75 flatboats come out and troops board those flatboats, come over and land here in Brooklyn. They bring with them about 40 pieces of artillery, Hessian mercenaries, light cavalry, all landing here in Brooklyn. Now when the American forces see the British landing, they begin firing their guns as a signal to Washington all the way over there in Manhattan that the British have landed. Washington hears the signal, he heads over to Brooklyn and meets with General Sullivan. Now, Washington isn't convinced that this is really the beginning of the battle. Washington thinks this might be a fake out on the part of General Howe, who might be leading him over here while still intending to attack New York City from the north down the Hudson River. So Washington is skeptical. He leaves some reinforcements, but he returns to his headquarters in New York City down on the tip of Manhattan Island. The next day, Americans, for the very first time, will encounter feared Hessian mercenaries. They've been led to believe that the Hessians are virtually indestructible, the greatest fighters from all of Europe. And a bunch of Pennsylvania riflemen will encounter them behind us, or in front of me, at Flatbush, Brooklyn. And amazingly, they kill some Hessians. They push them back, burn the homes they've been staying in, and take one of the bodies back to their camp to prove to their fellow Americans, hey, these guys aren't so bad. Look, we killed a couple ourselves. They die just like we do, and you can shoot them and kill them. So this is a morale booster for the Americans. 2 days later, August 25th, Howe will land more men in Brooklyn, giving his numbers about 20,000. Washington now realizes that the battle for New York is going to start here in Brooklyn. He comes over to Brooklyn with additional reinforcements. Washington will have about 9,000. They'll be outnumbered 2-1 for the coming battle. Now the Americans think they're going to be beaten. The British think they're going to beat them easily. And Admiral Lord Howe says, when we unleash the full force and fury of the British here at New York, and they see what they'll have to fight, they will surrender. And all will go back to normal. We'll forgive them for what they've done up until this point. But you know, as usual, the British have underestimated the American spirit, and the Battle of Long Island, now today known as the Battle of Brooklyn, will go on for 1 week. And the Americans, well, you'll find out what happens to them in the next video.
As you can imagine, it's a thrilling thing to be able to stand right there in Brooklyn, right near the spot where the British landed that day, August 22nd, 1776, as they crossed from their command base in Staten Island. Let's think about what it was like that day if you were in Brooklyn to experience that landing. So in the months leading up to August, both sides have been massing in New York. The British have a large army based on Staten Island. General Washington has his army based on Manhattan Island, and he's outnumbered approximately 2-1 in force. In addition to that, the British have deployed the largest naval invasion in history until that point to New York. Estimated about 500 ships have arrived to assist General William Howe in his attack on New York. Now, the British plan is to take the island of Manhattan to use as a forward operating base, right? If they take New York, they have a great accessible spot to keep their army and to also base their navy, right? Think about New York Harbor is right on the Atlantic Ocean. It's very easy to get into the harbor. There's Staten Island to protect the entrance. And then if your troops are on Manhattan Island, they're very well defended. And you can mobilize them fast. Your ships can carry them up the East River, right out into the Long Island Sound and up through New England. They can also go up the Hudson River up into the interior of the northeastern part of the country. And of course, straight in and out of the harbor to the Atlantic Ocean. So New York, or the island of Manhattan, which was all of New York City at that time, was a prized possession on both sides. So since the spring, both sides have been massing for this coming battle to take the area. So if you were living in Brooklyn, this was a horrifying event when this landing occurred. And one woman wrote to her daughter in New Jersey and said it was hell unleashed on earth. She said thousands of redcoats, Hessian mercenaries, artillery, cavalry, moving through Brooklyn, destroying everything in their path. And that is pretty much the truth, right? I think I mentioned in the video that Admiral Howe said, when we unleash the full force and fury of the British Empire, and they see what they'll have to fight, they'll surely surrender. And the Americans did not surrender in the battle for New York, although you'll find out at the end how it went for them. They never surrendered. Again, this was the British typically underestimating the American people, who they did not understand. I've spoken in a number of my videos about a great man in New York, Alexander McDougall, who once told the New York Chamber of Commerce that the Parliament was a distant and corrupt government that knew nothing of our way of life here. And we really see that playing out throughout the Battle of New York. And you'll see it again and again in these engagements. The British just assuming they're going to win because everybody over here are just, provincial fools who can't fight anyway. And they're going to learn quite differently about the American spirit and the way people fought. Now, also, when this invading army arrived, whatever you have, you built yourself. There was nobody to help you. Everything you had, you built yourself. If you were a small farmer, if you were an artisan, whatever you had, it was yours. So you're going to fight to keep it. So the British are going to wind up fighting not only an army on the battlefield, but we today would call an insurgency. And those are the regular people of America, not necessarily in the military, who join up to confound them in various different ways as the war goes on, right? They'll spy, they'll get rid of all of their supplies or their livestock so the British can't have it. They'll shoot them from their homes, all kinds of things the British aren't expecting. Now, the British need the island of Manhattan. This is primary to their whole plan in the colonies. And Lord Germain, I always want to say he's this Secretary of War, he's the Minister of War in London, really had given the Howe brothers, Lord Admiral Richard Howe and Sir William Howe, all the resources Britain had available to beat Washington at New York. And their plan is to draw Washington onto the island of Manhattan, where he already is, although they've just moved him off a little bit. But supposedly there's some strategy on General Howe's side in that. And get him on Manhattan Island, surround him with army and naval forces, and defeat the army in Manhattan. They have to do that because, as Lord Germain and many British commanders, including Lord Admiral Howe, warned, if the Americans get out of New York and continue on into the continent, we'll never beat them. We won't be able to find them. We won't know who's with us and who's against us. And it will be virtually impossible to win the war. So New York, the Battle of New York, is of prime strategic significance to both sides. And some of you might already know how this ends, but even though you might know how it ends, it still is a fascinating story. Now, I'll be sharing those other videos with you over the next few months as the Battle of New York goes on the days which they occurred. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of my commentary on the Battle for New York, 1776. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for supporting me. I'm Mrs. Q, and I'll see you next time.